Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Friends, this is a confusing time to be a content creator, a influencer, or a journalist, depending on how you see podcasts, because right now the writers and the actors are both on strike. Requests have gone out about not making content that is about struck work, and myself and Riki Hayashi are going to talk about it. Talk about the strikes, why they matter. I think if you listen to my podcast that came out on Tuesday about the movie Newsies, you know pretty solidly where I stand. But I think there's a lot to go into about what does this strike mean for all of us? You know, how do we best support it? What does it mean for content creators? And where do we stand with all of the other live action created media that exists for Star Wars? So there's a lot to talk about. Myself and Riki Hayashi are going to get into it right after this commercial break. Welcome back. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined, as I said, by Riki Hayashi, and probably one of the first things you'll notice is that we're not talking about Rebels today. For the moment, I've decided that on this and my other podcast, we're not going to make any content that's going to be about the media that's created by the struck companies. That's the terminology that's being used. And so we're not doing Rebels today. That may change as more news comes out, as more ideas come out. Certainly, I hope the strike gets settled pretty soon. But Riki, I really wanted to have you on to talk about the strikes and what all this means. So let me kind of just start by asking you, what's been your understanding of the strike and how you've been feeling about it with both the writer strike and now the actor strike going on?
Sure. I mean, just in general, I would say that I am pro-union, pro-worker, and so support this decision. I think it's complicated when you're talking about media past and present, or present and future, whatever, however you want to say it, because the show Star Wars Rebels certainly was made by people who are being paid and all that, but I think we want to make sure we're doing things right, is your position. And you wanted to get some answers on that. And so, taking a pause, I think, is good. And then discussing the issue on hand of the people who are striking. I follow a few people on Twitter, Adam Conover, who has been a very prominent voice in all of this. And so, I'm getting some news and information and trying to understand. And one of the biggest issues that I see being discussed is AI, the use of artificial intelligence to supplement, potentially even replace writers and actors. That's a big issue. And you're talking about human beings who are doing labor and then trying to replace them with machines to do that labor. And in some case, against their will, against the will of the humans and their consent. So I think that's a very important issue going forward for everyone if we're talking about labor, human labor being replaced by machines.
For sure. And I want to talk about that on a general level, but it's funny because the specific thing you just mentioned about AI, I think is actually very relevant to Star Wars, because as many folks know, if you don't follow the business too much, you may not know this, but James Earl Jones apparently made a deal with Disney where he knows he's aging, and I think he doesn't want to keep doing voice work, and he realizes he won't be around to keep doing voice work as long as there's probably going to be Darth Vader appearing in things. And so he made a deal with Disney that he went into a studio and they recorded his voice doing, saying all the things that the AI needed. And he got paid very lucratively for this, and he gave his full consent. As I understand, he was part of the planning of this. And so he got to agree, I am willing to let you use my voice for this character in this specific way, and I'm being compensated quite well for it. And I bring that up because I think that is, I recognize that technology is going to keep advancing and people are going to use it. And I think there's something to be said for some degree of can we find the ethical ways, the consensual ways to use this kind of thing? And I think that might be an example of one way it could happen. I'm not in the union negotiations, and that's probably something that's just done for the big star. But the point is that in that case, the actor was well compensated, and even more importantly, fully consented, fully gave their permission and negotiated this.
Yes.
And that is so markedly different than what's being talked about in these strikes in terms of the idea of the background actor who comes in once and then can get used, for anything. They could have someone who goes in for one day of shoots on, an action movie, and then the next day they take his image and dress him in Victorian garb, and he's the background for the latest version of Pride and Prejudice, which I think is actually not Victorian, it's Edwardian, so please don't, it might even be Restoration. Please don't yell at me about all that. But you get my point. And it's funny. I, like you, have a very strong pro-union bias. My mother raised me to believe that you never cross a picket line, and that was, one of the real cardinal rules in life, as strong as never having tomato sauce out of a jar. These kind of things. And it's something I've always respected and held to. And it's funny, too, because, it would take a bad writer to script the kind of supervillain type things that these companies are now doing. And it's everything from people have published the requests that were being made by the unions and their the just utter lack of response and rejection of everything from the companies. The quotes that have come out from people thinking that wanting to have control over your own likeness is unreasonable and that they're concerned by it. This by a person, Bob Iger, the head of Disney, who makes millions and millions and millions of dollars. The comment about wanting to starve people out until they're, losing their homes as a way of putting economic pressure on them to force them to come back to the table. And then the latest that we've gotten is reports that, and not even reports, pictures and full proof that the trees that were giving shade to strikers outside one of the major factories, major studios, I believe Universal, that they were all trimmed down quite significantly in ways that numerous arborists have been like, this is horrible for the trees, but they also cut off all shade. It's mustache twirling villain type stuff, and to me at least, it makes it very easy to know which side to take.
Yeah, well, even in one of the other prominent anti-union things going on, Starbucks, right? Mm-hmm. Starbucks, if baristas at a store try to form a union, Starbucks basically just closes that store. Yep. Because they have, 5 other ones within 20 blocks. So they don't care which of those stores are open. But hey, if you start talking about unions, your store's gone. That's what they do. So, because it comes down to the money. You mentioned Bob Iger, Disney CEO, right? Or exec, some kind of exec at Disney. I pulled up this image that I wanted to reference from,
and we'll make sure that image is in the show notes or is in the kind of links for all that.
This is just a screenshot from MSNBC, and it's a tweet from someone who's saying, "Will someone please think about the CEOs?" And this is an image of highest paid Hollywood executives in the last 5 years. And Mr. Bob Iger is on there. He's one of the top 10. I guess this is over 5 years. Mm-hmm. He made $195 million.
Right.
Bob did. Other names on here, like another prominent one from Warner Brothers, David Zaslav.
Zaslav, yep.
Yeah. He's the highest paid, $498 million. And his name came up a lot because of stuff relating to Batgirl and The Flash, right? Those movies, and how those rollouts have gone, and Batgirl just being canceled for a tax break. And that's a stunning amount of money, right? These people don't need more money and probably should not make this much money. I don't know about the business of movies and TV, but I'm just going to say those people should make less money, and the people who are doing a lot of the work, the writing, the acting, give them some more money. Why not? It's literally pennies too. Pennies to these people, what the guilds are asking for. So I am always of the opinion, fairly socialist, I'll say, distribute wealth more evenly so that people have a chance to earn a living wage or even a comfortable wage versus someone having more boats.
I 100% there with you. I want the orcas to be able to take care of the boats that there are. They don't need to have more targets. But and there's a couple things I want to say there. I want to say more about the actors and writers strike directly. But first, just responding a bit to, I'm really glad you brought up the Starbucks strike, because I think one of the critiques I hear that I think it's important to keep in mind is, yeah, this is an important strike, and it hits home for a lot of people because it so affects the things that we consume so regularly. But that there are a lot of other things that are on strike, that have been on strike or are on strike or might soon be on strike and are just as barbaric. Starting August 1st, it's very possible that UPS drivers will be on strike. Mm-hmm. And their main demands aren't about salary. There probably is some salary demands, but two of their biggest demands are, first of all, they want air conditioning in the UPS trucks. Now,
yeah, please.
It's record heat all over the country. And, all they want is, and yes, they sometimes drive slowly down the street with their doors open and the like, but still, it's going to get very hot in those trucks, not to mention, they have to do some highway driving at some point. Like, that's such a basic thing. As well as not having mandatory overtime, being able to have some ability to schedule when they're going to have time with their families versus when they can be called in. And similarly with the unions, I think, first of all, it's important to understand that we hear a lot about, Matt Damon makes this many millions of dollars for a movie. Catherine Zeta-Jones makes this many millions. I'm probably dating myself. I don't think she's made a movie in 10 years. But Scarlett Johansson, like whoever it is, yes, these people make astronomical salaries. And perfectly frankly, like I wouldn't mind if the union, there was some like call for some of those salaries to be pushed down a bit. But like you said, I think it's the CEO salaries that I'm much more concerned about. But still, those people are a tiny minority. Same with the big name writers who make huge salaries. This strike is mostly about people who are making under $26,000 a year from this kind of work. Mm-hmm. I think something like 86% of SAG members have other jobs as well because they're trying to make ends meet, because it is so hard to make enough money to live off of as an actor. And this is part of what they're trying to fix. And one of the things I think that's so important about the strike as well is it's not just about saying, give us more money. That's a part of it, but part of it's also that there are things being done that actively cut away from the amount of money actors and writers should be getting in ways that I think are pretty unfair. And the residuals is one that I think gets brought up a lot. For those who don't fully understand the issue, and I'm not part of the union, but after some research, a good amount of research, this is my brief summary of it. So if you have corrections, please, put them in the comments when we post these episodes. But the basic idea is that when you are a part of a movie as an actor who, like somewhere in the principal cast, I don't think this is for like every single background actor, but certainly for a lot of the actors, not just the huge stars, as well as I think for some of the top writers, the better that movie did or that TV show did, the more you got paid in these things that are called residuals. And that went for the amount of money it made on television, every time it got syndicated, every time, VHS, wow, I'm really dating myself, DVD and Blu-ray sales, all that kind of stuff, movie tickets, etc. With streaming services are not in their contract because they didn't exist the last time the contract was made. Now, it seemed pretty logical to say we have a contract that says you get paid every time people watch this product that you helped create. So now there's a new way to help create that product. We're going to pay you in that new way. We're just going to renegotiate in some way. But instead, no, there's been a flat refusal to say, oh, no, it's streaming on Netflix. That's not in your contract, so none of that counts.
Yeah. That rings so true. Like the residuals from streaming, just like merchandising, right? I watched a documentary about Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock in the original Star Trek series. And when they were getting ready to make the first motion picture, Star Trek 1, the movie back in like 1980, like 15, 20 years after the TV show, he held out because I think it's Paramount, right? Mm-hmm. Was licensing Star Trek. They were making money off of Star Trek, lunch boxes and action figures and all that, like getting that revenue. Mm-hmm. And the people whose likeness they were using, the character who, the actors who portrayed these characters were getting nothing from that.
Yeah.
And he held out because he's like, no, you're like, this is a picture of me on this lunchbox. You have to give me money for this.
Yeah.
And so like the companies, like the organizations are always trying to find ways to make money, which is just capitalism, like accept it. But you have to share that fairly with the people who created a thing or helped make a thing, even if it wasn't part of the original negotiation. Like I truly believe in like that kind of fairness. And it's like, oh, but you didn't sign this contract that said that's like, but you also have like $1 million lawyers who are like writing these contracts. Yeah. And it's just like fundamentally not fair.
And I'm a big believer that the spirit of the contract should continue as new technology changes the exact terms of it. And so, and if you want to renegotiate a bit and like the numbers move a little bit, sure, but at least let that be part of the conversation.
And what you said about James Earl Jones, like he signed off on this. He consented to this. He got paid. I'm still kind of not comfortable going forward with like AI, James Earl Jones, Darth Vader voice. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But there are so many people who didn't consent to anything.
Yeah.
Mainly because they passed long ago. Like Peter Cushing, Grand Moff Tarkin is in Rogue One. And he certainly didn't sign off on that. Did his family get paid for that? Or what?
Yeah.
I think in the new Flash movie, they use likenesses of people who have passed, like DC characters who have passed, right?
Yeah, Christopher Reeves among them.
They didn't consent to this, and it's not using images from like the original Superman movie. It is like digital recreations of them taking new actions, like acting in new ways, and that's just to me like that you can't do that, and so like that is a big part of what this strike is about. It's like you can't do that.
Yeah. No, I think it's so very true, and I think I do think that in some of those cases, in some cases the family was compensated or even asked specifically for permission, but in some cases they definitely weren't, and I think it's it's one more thing where I'm not at the negotiating table, and I don't think I can get into the weeds of it, but I think I'm going to trust the union. I'm going to trust the union that their demands make sense, and from everything we've seen, the companies absolutely don't, and so that's where I'm going to stand. So that's where we each feel individually. And I think then the next part of the question is, what does it mean for us as people who like to talk about these things online? And I'll start, as I said, there's been more and more guidelines coming out from the union, but let's put even that aside for the moment. I don't think either you or I has plans to try and join the union anytime soon. And while I like to think that my influence is going to grow, I don't think anyone's going to be calling me and asking me to be a scab and go to a premiere of anything and give my important take anytime soon. But and we'll get to kind of what the unions have been saying that folks should do. But even putting any of that aside, what was your reaction, or what thoughts did you have, if any, about someone who's been with me making regular content about Star Wars stuff for the last couple of years now? What was your thought when you heard about the strikes and how that might affect things?
I mean, first off, good for them was my thought. And also, like, how it's going to affect us. This is a very clear red line, being drawn of anything after this, like anything that happens while a strike is going on. Like, if the studios try to continue to make something, to put something out, like, that's a hard no, right? Like,
yeah.
And as I said, you and I on this show have been dealing with a show, Star Wars Rebels, that was put out during a non-struck period. So, I'm okay to, as a viewer, to watch things right now, right? Like, yeah, it's kind of like the thing. But anything that they make right now, like, I'm absolutely not going to watch. Like, made by scabs, as you say. Mm-hmm. And because, like, here's the thing. When I was growing up, in the 2000s, there was a fairly prominent writer's strike. And I have memories of it because my memory is that it quote unquote ruined several shows that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
Which was Battlestar Galactica and Heroes. You know, and if you're a geek, you probably remember those shows, and they were greatly affected. And at the time, and for years after that, I was like, oh, like it's too bad that the writer's strike, you know, that the writers struck, and then like these shows kind of got derailed. The reason they got derailed is because they tried to go on without the writers. Like they used scavs, or they forced like the showrunner, who was not part of SAG, I believe, to continue the show. They're like, no, like keep making it. And like, but my writers are on strike. I can't do anything. It's like, I don't know, you write it.
I know there were a couple of shows. I'm not sure if it was either one of those, but a couple of other shows where they basically would just have the show writer or someone else write kind of like general outlines for scenes, and then just have the actors all do it by improv, which like Friday Night Lights was done entirely about that way because it was planned that way. But when actors aren't expecting that, especially when a show is known for really good snappy dialogue, like, it's often going to fall apart.
So because that was just the writers, right? That was not the screen actors. That was not, so they were still kind of able to operate and make these shows. Fair enough. But especially when it comes to TV shows we love, like we understand, like obviously the actors are important because we see them on screen. But I think you and I know how important writers are, and we oftentimes like identify certain writers and be like, this person did this episode. Like I really like their stuff. Like that type of situation. So if you remove those people and you say, well, now you have to do it with scavs or people who are not in the guild, and you force these shows to do that, they're going to suffer. And like I said, when I was growing up, I didn't fully understand the situation. So I kind of blamed the writers for striking. And that's wrong. Like, I see that now. Like, you gotta blame the executives, the companies who were like, nah, like, we're just gonna keep doing this thing and, like, whatever.
Yeah.
And I had, like, similar feelings about the baseball strike. You know, in 1994, the players' union went on strike, and the World Series was canceled. I was a kid, and I loved baseball, and I was like, why are you striking? Like, give me the World Series. Yeah. But no, like, they were fighting for a good cause. Yeah. And the narrative that was spun was like, they were fighting so Alex Rodriguez can get paid $200 million, right? Like, again, like, you're talking about, like, Scarlett Johansson, like, the big ticket actors. Like, no, it's about, and especially in baseball, it's about the minor leaguers. Yeah. Like that, they get paid like less than minimum wage because, oh, you got a signing bonus and all that. And it's really atrocious.
I'm close to you in age, a little bit young, a little bit older. And yeah, I had similar experiences because, you know, with the baseball strikes and the NFL strikes. And later realized like, no, so much of this was about like just the health care for, you know, because so many players would come into the league, play for maybe a season or two, not get a chance to make huge money, have injuries that would last the rest of their lives, and then have no way to pay for it. Right. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
So it's often the case that the billionaires, right, the owners, the CEOs will try to turn the narrative on, oh, like these greedy players, these people are millionaires. Why are they asking for more money? But there are so many people in the system who are not millionaires. They're trying. Like the minor leaguers, that's what they're trying to do. But they're getting so little. And those people deserve something too.
And I think that also brings up another important point. I want to get back to the content creator question. Yeah. But I think it brings up another important point that I really learned. Like I said, I used to be a union organizer. Most of my career was as a community organizer, of which union organizing is one type. And one of the fundamental rules in community organizing is no permanent allies, no permanent enemies. And what it means is, like, when you are focused on a particular cause, you fight on that cause, and you line up with the people who are your allies on that fight. And even if they were across the table from you on a different fight, if they're with you on this fight, that's who you work with some, you know, some exceptions, of course. But, you know, as an example, I think another thing that studios are trying to put out, or, you know, people who are just acting on their own, but I think often with the support of the studios, is trying to attack some of the people who are the real leaders of this. And, I'll say, for example, like Fran Drescher, the actress who is in The Nanny and has done a lot of other great stuff. She's run a theater company for quite some time. She's the president of SAG. She's made some great speeches. You dig a little deeper, you find out, her kids are vaxxed, but she fought pretty hard against vaccine mandates. And I strongly disagree with her on that and think that she's probably done a lot of harm through that. Does that mean I'm going to, but do I think that her actions on that other issue in any way impugn the union's fight? Absolutely not. Does it mean I think she's not she's the person who the union elected as the president because she's not talking about vaccines. She's talking about the union's issues. And is she the perfect spokesman? Probably not. But the world isn't made of perfect people. And she's the president. She's doing a good job. She's fighting for what she believes in and what the union that elected her believes in. And so I'm going to support her. And I think that's probably true of, and obviously I'm not trying to be, doctrinaire about that. There are lines. And I think there's, certainly times where we can say, like, I'm not going to valorize this particular person just because they're a movement leader. I think sometimes they're movement leaders who we need to talk about their flaws and their faults. But right now, this isn't about Fran Drescher. It's about the union. And so I think that can often be a real distraction tactic.
Yeah, I had seen the speeches by Fran Drescher and was very impressed because, like you said, like I really only knew her from The Nanny, and she had that annoying voice, and like that's just a character. But in my head, like that's all I know about her. But the speeches she made were very good, and I was like, okay, like this is good stuff. I did not know about the, as you said, anti-vax situation. That's unfortunate. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you and I both follow politics a lot, politicians, and we recognize that even there are politicians who we do not like personally or like disagree with a lot of things they do, but when they are on our side, when they are trying to fight for something we believe in, like, yeah, we kind of have to get behind that, right? Like, we cannot say, oh, well, no. So it's a similar situation, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it's very true. And so let's pull it back to the idea of content creators. Did you, because I eventually reached out to you and said, hey, let's talk about what we're going to do with our content. Was it something you'd thought about before I contacted you, or you or Sarah had talked about?
It did occur to me. Mm-hmm. It definitely occurred to me, and so I'm really like conflicted going forward for sure. Like I would personally be okay with continuing on talking about Rebels because it's past content. However, this is your show, so I'm absolutely gonna back you on your decision. And going forward, like I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. So I would definitely appreciate hearing more from you and more from you all in the audience on your feelings. Like I think this is the kind of thing where community dialogue and discussion with peers and people, whose opinions you trust is important.
Very much so. Very much so. And I will say part of my discussion came out of some of that discussion with peers, namely some of the other big Star Wars content creators who I follow. Mm. So let me talk a little bit about what that process has been like, because, when the writer's strike first happened, I also gave this some thought and, paid a lot of attention to, I had kind of an idea in mind of if anything was going to be being made by struck content that I wouldn't get into it at all. And like as one example, I know that there's a particular scene, I think it's the opening credits of only the first episode in Marvel's Secret Invasion that was created through AI. And I just decided, and normally I don't comment too much about those the MCU shows, especially because, the MCU cast is one of my favorite podcasts. I'm good friends with the people who make that. I would like to let them kind of have first crack at that. And then maybe like halfway through or later, I'll do more of an ethics-focused episode. And this one I haven't even watched it yet because I thought, it's being made by AI at a time when that's one of the big things the writers are fighting about. I'm just not going to touch it. And then when the actor strike kind of kicked in, it made me think about this all again. And I do think that there's something to be said for maybe we should have been thinking about this just during the writer's strike, and that there maybe is a little bit more of a focus on the actors than the writers, which I think myself and a lot of us are guilty of. But either way, I did some more thinking about it and thinking again about, what I learned from my mom about not crossing a picket line. Because what she meant by it was, we weren't part of these unions. My parents were lawyers. They weren't unions they were parts of. But they meant it in terms of where we do our business. And, I remember one time I organized a bunch of friends to go down to Atlantic City to play poker at one of my favorite casinos. And we got there and the dealers went on strike. And I'm sorry, not the dealers. I think it was the wait. Some people of the staff were on strike, but there was a picket line, and they brought in, I think, scabs to help work the hotel or whatever it was. And I didn't know anything about the strike, but I wasn't going to cross a picket line. And it was 25 years ago. I don't remember 20 years ago, but I think I wound up getting everybody to go to a different casino because I just didn't want to cross that picket line. And in the same way, I think one of my first urges was to say, okay, well, then I'm not going to go to any movies. I'm going to cancel my subscription services and stuff like that. The unions have specifically said they are asking people not to do that yet. And one thing I'm a real big believer in is that the unions know best what the strategy should be. And yeah, I think that part of that is that that's kind of one of the most extreme bullets in their gun. And they don't want to fire it until they're ready to. And I think that that's perfectly reasonable. And so I decided not to do that. And I think at the time I said, yeah, so I'll keep making content. And then this all came out and I started thinking more about it and started realizing what I don't feel comfortable doing is, because here's the thing I think, and here's maybe where the actors part of it makes it really different, is that one of the things that actors do and are paid to do is to go out and promote the content that they're making. They go on interview shows, they go on, the different talk shows and stuff like that. They have their own social medias. They make TikToks and tweets and all this kind of stuff to encourage people to get excited about the new content that's coming out. And when all of them stopped doing that, there was a lot of discussion about, okay, well, we have to be careful because influencers and content creators are going to kind of, if we're not careful, wind up filling those roles and becoming scabs. And certainly there have already been attempts by the big studios to reach out to content creators and say, hey, we're going to pay you this amount of money to go to this premiere and this kind of stuff, because the actors aren't going anymore. As I said, I don't think I'm ever good. I hope I'm big enough one day that I get that kind of offer that I can turn down. I would turn it down, but I'm not that big yet. But one of the things I started really thinking about was, okay, how much is the content that I create still encouraging people to get excited about the new stuff that's coming out? Especially because a lot of the Star Wars stuff we've been doing has been very much focused on getting ready for Ahsoka. And here I'll admit is where my own personal dilemma comes in that I want these podcasts to grow. I spent a lot of time and effort and money making them happen, and I'd like to make more money. I'd like to have more listeners. I'd like to have more reach. And I had been planning that Ahsoka would be a really good time for that. When the Obi-Wan show came out and Andor came out, I kind of did big publicity pushes, and that got us a lot of growth. And I was really excited to really do double down and have a whole plan. And here's, week by week, different people would come on, different content, all to get people really fired up and excited for the Ahsoka show. And one of the first things I decided, though, was that I couldn't do that. That the Ahsoka content was going to be coming out, and as far as I know, it had been made entirely and finished pre-strikes. I really hope there weren't any scabs who did rewrites. I think we would have heard about it if there were, but maybe there have been. Who knows? If there are any last-minute shoots still going on. But then I started thinking, okay, well, what's the rest of it? And my brain was going a lot through, okay, what are the different conditions? How does this work? And the SAG-AFTRA, the union, has put out various guidelines, and it's not really clear exactly where podcasters fit. Because one of the things they've said is that they want journalists to still cover, things exactly as they would. I think by a lot of accounts, podcasters are considered journalists. Certainly, I get press passes to a lot of conferences and stuff like that. we're also, though, still building influence and building, we are building hype for these shows, though. That's a part of what we do. Even if we're critical of them, we're still generating interest and getting people thinking about them. So I was really kind of on the fence about that. And that's why I think it was easy for me to kind of say, okay, well, no Ahsoka. And then I started to wonder about Rebels specifically. And this is one I admit I'm still a little bit on the fence about, but I'm still leaning more towards not doing coverage for now, because Rebels is animation. And animation, and this is maybe a better issue that should also be discussed at some point, but right now, voice actors in animation are not covered by SAG. It's a different, I don't think they have their own union, or if they do, it's something very different. But, and specifically in the guidance that has been given to actors, they have been told you can still do voice acting for video games, for animation, for, all this other stuff that's just not part of the companies we're striking against, or not part of the kind of work that we're striking about. And so that, to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, then Rebels is fine, and we're all good about it. And so I wrote into the union to kind of get some feedback on this, but I know a lot of people are writing into the union these days, and they may respond to me at some point, but it may take a while. And one of the things I think a lot of people are getting confused about is that there are two very different things that the union has been putting out. One of which are the rules for their members, which is, here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do. And I mean, that's part of how a union works. It has to be how a union works. And the idea is that all the members get to vote to help decide who, makes these rules and stuff like that. And the rules often also apply to people who might one day want to be part of the union. And then as a totally separate thing, they're also saying, and hey, to anyone who wants to support the strike, here are the things that we're asking you to do. And part of that is to not, create social media about the products that are being struck from the companies that are being struck. And there again, like I said, like maybe animation means it's not quite the same. Maybe podcast means it's not quite the same. But I just feel like I don't want to even try to look for a loophole like that. It feels like just looking for a loophole. And I'd rather just say, across the board, I'm just not going to do it. And frankly, that is because a lot of the other Star Wars creators that I really follow on TikTok and Twitter and other great podcasts, including a number of people who have been big guests of this show, they themselves have come out and said, we're just not going to do any Star Wars content. And I was like, yeah, and I listened to their reasoning, and that really helped me make the decision for myself that this is where we're going to be for now. And, if the union comes out with specific guidelines about animation, maybe we'll change on that, but I think that's going to qualify. There's other stuff like the video games and books and things like that you and I will talk about in a bit. But first, I'll just kind of pause because I've been monologuing a long while and let you jump in with any comments or questions or disagreements or whatever the heck you want to say.
No, it was a good monologue. I was compelled.
Thanks.
Very compelled. And no, I mean, it helps me. Like I said, I was looking to get your thoughts on this as well. So it's very helpful to me. And yeah, stuff is just uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Right now. And it's unfortunate that it's happening, but I have to believe that it's happening for a good reason. Like you said, trust the union and trust the leaders who are doing this, that they are doing it for a good cause. And I try to read up on it. And for that reason, I really do support what you're doing and the decision you're making. And I'm hopeful, again, with the timing of Ahsoka, it's very unfortunate for you and I personally, because it's something we have been looking forward to for so long, especially Rebels leading into it. And it is I want to be hyped for it, but you just can't under the circumstances. And it's similar to I don't know if it's similar, but the Flash movie, right? I didn't go watch that, and I don't know if I will ever watch it because of the circumstances surrounding the primary actor, Ezra Miller.
Ezra Miller, yeah.
Right? That they are accused of some pretty terrible things. Yeah. And I love The Flash. The Flash is one of my favorite characters the TV show, the Arrowverse TV show is one of my favorite TV shows. Like, well, not of all time. It's not a good show, but it's a fun show. I enjoy it. And part of it is because I enjoy the character of the Flash. And so, like, it is kind of crestfalling for me to not watch that movie because I love the Flash so much. And I've heard, like, that it's a pretty fun movie to watch. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm not going to see it. And so, like, I'm in that similar boat. It's like, wow, I've been really looking forward to Ahsoka. Like, wow, I really want to see Grand Admiral Thrawn and talk about it and get excited. But yeah, like, not at the cost of, like, feeling icky about it.
Yeah. No, I think I'm exactly there. I will say I'm going to disagree with the people. I think that if you like The Flash, you have many, many, many reasons not to see this movie because it's utterly abominably bad. But putting that aside, yeah, I get it. And I think, and yeah, it's going to hurt me financially, but I think a lot of other people are making much bigger sacrifices. For me, podcasting is still only a small part of my income. I would like it to be larger. I would like to be able to put more focus into it. And like I said, I was really hoping this would help get me there. But, you know, to me, I think to participate in capitalism, you have to be willing to sometimes say, I am going to put the needs of others and the good of others above my personal self-interest. And there are people who are doing that far more than I. Friendly Neighborhood Master Alan of Level Up Sabers, which is a fantastic company. It's where I bought my lightsaber. If you're thinking of buying a lightsaber, it's a fantastic place to do so. And he also has some great videos on like how to learn how to be better at lightsabers. Strong recommendation. He put out a TikTok that I saw actually just like 5 minutes before you and I recorded, where he said, look, like he makes his entire living by selling them. And one of the things that he does, he has some that are like, you know, he has like a Barbie lightsaber and a Battlestar Galactica themed lightsaber. But as you can imagine, a lot of his lightsabers are specifically themed to characters. And so he has like Ahsoka lightsabers that he was going to promote very strongly in the lead up to the show. And he's decided he's just not going to do that. He's still going to have them available for sale, but he's not going to do any promotion that's tied in any way to any Star Wars characters or things like that. And I was like, you're going to take a financial hit for that. And I'm incredibly, I really respect that you're going to do that. You know, and he said in the same way, like, you know, when his shipping prices go up during the UPS strike, he's not going to raise prices on everyone else. You know, he's willing to help eat that. And, you know, I think there's a lot of other people. There are a lot of people who do make their full living from this stuff who are not going to take these steps. And so I'm glad to be a part of that. One thing I will say is if you are inspired by my economic self-sacrifice and want to help out, my Patreon is always right there in the comments, in the show notes. But I'm not going to say, so I would love it if more people decided to sign up to help support this. But I'm also going to say that while the strike is going on, I want to be giving back as well. So 25% of anything I make from Patreon from now until the strike ends, including the last week or so, 25% of that is going to go directly to the fund that is there to help the actors and writers who are out of work because of the strike. And actually, I think it's actually doing a lot to help even people who are affected by it, like, you know, like the catering staff, like all the people who work, like their contracts aren't even being negotiated, but they're out of work because the thing, you know, all production is halted. So it's a great fund. I'll have a link to it. If you want to donate directly to that, that'd be fantastic. And if you decide this is a good time to join Patreon, you get ad-free content, you get bonus content, and it helps support people like myself. But yeah, I think that's what's really important. And so let's then kind of use that to transition to talk about the wide world of stuff that is Star Wars that is outside of TV and movies and even animation. Things that are outside, you know, having writers and actors. Well, somewhat, although we're also going to talk about video games. Because here's one that I'm really not... I think I know where I stand and that I'm more comfortable doing this stuff, but I'm curious your thoughts as well. Because it is still all under Disney. It is all still money going to Disney. I feel differently about it because it is completely outside of the stuff that the union is doing, and the union's not asking for a boycott of these companies yet. And I feel like, frankly, like the books, the comic books, the video games don't get anywhere near the attention they do. And this is a good time to talk about them instead. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Oh boy. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a very popular phrase, there's no ethical consumption in capitalism, right?
Yeah.
And so navigating these decisions, you can never be consistent, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, if you want to be consistent, you have to go live in the forest and, like, never consume anything and, like, live off the land. That said, like, every one of us every day makes various decisions on, I want to buy this or I don't want to buy this based on various feelings. And so, like, I think it's important that each person makes decisions for themselves and decides like what they are willing to do or what they aren't willing to do. And like the lightsaber person you were talking about, like, you mentioned that they were still going to sell the Ahsoka themed sabers on the website. And some people might side eye that and like, oh, wait a minute, but you're still, kind of profiting off of Ahsoka. Yeah. And that's a decision that person has made. And I think it's a reasonable one, that they're not going to like openly promote Ahsoka the show and say, hey, I have these Ahsoka themed things. Yeah. They exist. Like they already made them, right? Like that's part of the issue again, is that they had already made these and like prepared to sell them in anticipation of the show. And sometimes just like turning around and like stopping that is just like, you can't do that as someone, as a business. So I understand that. And I respect the decision that they made.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to say there. One, just on the general, I really appreciate that you brought up that statement, no ethical consumption under capitalism, because I think a lot of people fundamentally misunderstand it. I think some people say since you can never be like pure under capitalism, then why bother about anything? You should just spend your money on whatever you want and not have any ethical considerations whatsoever. That's not what the statement means in the slightest. What it means is that there is nothing that is going to be 100% pure. Well, I mean, you go to a farmer who's out in the middle of the woods and you give them money and they give you apples. Sure. But it's very hard to structure your entire life around that. And even there, like most of it's just like, well, because you don't know what pesticides they're using or not using, or, whatever it is. But so the point of the saying is you're going to have to make compromises. So the point is to inform yourself as much as you can and then to make the compromises that you think are, to find where your ethical lines are and to respect that other people might be trying their best, but still have, like, there are things that my friend Paul does where I'm like, I wouldn't consume the stuff you're consuming, but he thinks that all the meat that I consume is completely ethically, morally reprehensible. And so I, respect that. We're going to have different positions on things like this. And then more to the specific, I think you make some really good points. And, and again, like my podcast isn't my main source of income, but I'm trying to build it into something that can be. And on my other podcast, this is actually a lot easier. That one is Superhero Ethics. I hope most people here have listened to it at least once or twice, but if not, check it out. We have a pretty wide range of things we can look at, and I started by thinking that I would look at books a lot, and I actually now have podcasts lined up to record on some of the Discworld series, as well as Moby Dick, which I figured I should read at some point in time, and so we're going to talk about that. And then also, the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized, like, wait a minute, there is actually a ton of incredible on-screen stuff that happens that has nothing to do with these American corporations, that's made by the BBC or anime or, stuff out of the Indian subcontinent or, all over the world. There are things that are made by people that have nothing to do with these union fights. And so, why not talk about some of those things? And so that's more stuff that I'll be trying to cover. This podcast is called Star Wars Universe Podcast, so I can't really get away from, I could rename it, but I do love Star Wars and I want to keep talking about Star Wars, so.
Yeah. And I think, like, books should be fair game, like, it.
Yeah.
Like the no ethical consumption, like, but it all leads back to Disney, right? Okay. But it's like, I don't hate Disney. Like, I hate, again, that their executives make so many millions of dollars and some of the decisions they make. But fundamentally, like, as a fan, I love Star Wars and I love the Marvel stuff they put out, and I enjoy Disneyland. So, like,
it's the whole, like, no permanent allies, no permanent enemies. when Disney is fighting DeSantis in Florida, I'm 100% on Disney's side. When Disney is being an evil corporation, because it's a huge corporation and that's how corporations work, like this, I'm going to be totally against them. And I think that there's ways to find the balance there. So yeah. So
like you said, books, comic books. Oh, I mean, have you read Dark Empire yet? We could talk about Dark Empire, Matthew.
I think there's a certain doctor who I probably should be talking about some. You've teased me with some of the stuff about Dr. Afra. I think that's their name.
Oh, Dr. Afara, I think is how. She's not in Dark Empire.
Okay. My brain has real trouble with comic books, but I'm willing to give it a try. You know, I'm willing to kind of try, and certainly like the video games are great and have a lot of content. I want to finish the Jedi Survivor game, but Zelda came out and we started playing the Miles Morales game, and then there's Final Fantasy, so it's kind of low on the list. But as soon as we get to it, we'll definitely play it, and that we can talk about. And yeah, there's so many great novels to talk about.
Yes, I recommended to you, was it Resistance Reborn?
Yeah.
So if you read that, I could go back and give it a quick reread, and we could talk about that. Like, and I think that, those, from a logical perspective, like, those are fair game. And but as I said, like, each individual makes their own decision. And if there are people in the audience who are like, oh, like, I can't listen to a Star Wars podcast while this is going on, like, that's your decision. And everyone should make their own decision and be comfortable with it. And you can discuss and criticize other people's decisions, but, don't condemn them, I would say. Like, be reasonable about it. You know, one of the prominent ones I feel like that gets discussed a lot is Chick-fil-A, right? And their anti-LGBTQ money contributions. I do not eat at Chick-fil-A. I haven't eaten at Chick-fil-A in who knows how long, like 5-6 years probably at this point, at least. But if someone else does, like, I'm not going to slap the sandwich out of their hand and go, how dare you? Like that's not on me to do that. If it's a friend, like, and they want to discuss it, I'm happy to discuss it. Hey, like, this is a thing that happens, and this is why I don't eat it, but...
And I'll admit, that's one where you and I disagree. Because for me, when someone gives money to Chick-fil-A, that money, a part of it eventually is going to be used to help people who want me dead. And I don't mean in like the kind of like, oh, they're trying to ban, quite literal. In parts of the world, Chick-fil-A is funding where queer people are being put to death. And for me, I cannot feel safe around someone while they're eating Chick-fil-A because, if it's a kid or someone who truly lives under a rock, fine. But I don't think you can live in our society right now and not have some understanding of that because it's been so well publicized. And so if I'm in a space with, someone who calls themselves my friend or my colleague or whatever, and they're eating Chick-fil-A, I have to look at that and think, this person thinks that funding people who want me dead is okay if the chicken sandwich is good enough. And so this is a whole side discussion we can have another time. And like I said, different people are going to draw the line in different places. And, however morally upright I might get about some things, other people can say, but you kill animals for eating. And that's true. And I try to do that in more and more ethical ways as I go on. But, other people can look at my own ethical standards and say, but, you're a huge hypocrite because of this. So, and again, that wasn't meant to attack you. That was just meant to just give a very strident difference. Because even as you said that, I felt my own chest kind of tightening up my brain. Because it's, to me, it and Harry Potter are just such fundamental, like, iron lines of, if you're crossing this, you are telling me how little my life values to you. And so I don't want anything to do with you.
I respect that. I believe that's a strong stance, but I have personally cut out people who are not like very like strongly in people, but I've cut out people who, for example, like streamed the Harry Potter game when that came out.
Yeah.
I was just kind of like, oh, if you're going to do that, like, I don't really want to be around you, right? Yeah. But it's complicated in the way that the Rebels is complicated. Yeah. That people grew up reading Harry Potter before they knew. Like, I grew up reading Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, and I loved it. Yeah. Before I knew what kind of person he was and what he believed in and what he used his money for. So now, like, I haven't read one of his books in a long time, but it's still a part of my history and it's dear to me. And it's hard to cut that out of myself, right? Even though I can cut it out moving forward.
One thing I've been thinking about in terms of, as you mentioned, that writer strike from a while ago is, a lot of really great shows had some bad things to happen to them, but also some really good things came out of it. And Joss Whedon is now a person we know an awful lot more about, and so I don't think I would enjoy it as much watching it today. But Dr. Horrible was something that brought an awful lot of joy to me and was music that I did at concerts for a long time that I really, really loved. And that was created because of the writer's strike. And so I think it's and like, I'm sure there are topics. And I wanted to make this very clear both to yourself and to my audience. Meeting is just one example. I'm sure there are things that will bother you far more than they bother me. And so you will draw a stricter line on it than I will. And I think that's kind of the whole point, is we just need to be able to talk about those things and share them and say, here's where we very stand, and then figure things out from there.
Yeah. My perspective on it is that I am most familiar with my own life and my own, what I have lived and experienced. And what's important for all of us is to talk about things with other people who have experienced different things and who perceive the world differently from us. And then listen, and it doesn't, you don't have to change just because you had a talk with someone about something. But at least you have that perspective, and maybe going forward you will be more mindful of things and think about stuff. Like, that's what I think is most important, is like, some things, yes, like you should change. Absolutely. Otherwise we can't be friends. Like, that is a thing that can happen.
Yeah.
And like you discussing that it's important enough to you is something that I now will consider going forward and think about more.
And I think that's where the thing about the different perspectives becomes so vital, because part of it, I think, is also trusting that, there are elements of anti-Asian bias that I can spot. I came out of the first Phantom Menace movie going, wow, that was thinking both Jar Jar and the Neomodians were both pretty horrible racist caricatures. But then there's been a lot of other things where you have pointed out anti-Asian or specifically anti-Japanese bias in things that I wouldn't have noticed. And sometimes you point it out and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I really see it. And other times I'm like, I don't really see it. But I trust that Riki has had these experiences that I haven't, and has a much better lens on these things than I do. And it doesn't mean there probably might be still some things that I'm like, I feel like this is a projection or something like that. But I also think my opinion matters a lot less than yours and something like that. And in the reverse with queer and trans stuff, or with anyone else about the issues that directly affect them. Like, none of it's doctrinaire, none of it's exact lines in the sand, but I think as you said, there's just so much value to when someone else says, hey, this thing bothers me. If your first reaction is to say that it doesn't bother you, and so therefore they must be wrong, I think that's such a good response to train ourselves to push through and to say, no, let me actually hear from you more about why that bothers you, And if it's a person telling me why two men kissing on screen bothers them, I'm probably still going to come to the point of being like, no, you're stupid. I'm not going to pay attention to that. But a lot of other things I am, even if I don't necessarily see it myself. Or if I don't see it myself, I'm going to want to try and look harder and talk to more people about it and all these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I will say like, Phantom Menace, it took me a while, I think. I didn't come out of that first viewing going like, oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, within like I saw it in theaters 3 times, and maybe by the 3rd time, because I had already seen everything else, then I started to be like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But that's the thing, like, even I like didn't have an immediate gut reaction to it. And so, like, that's why I think, like, we all evolve, like, from viewing to viewing, from day to day. And over the years, like, stuff changes for us. Yeah. And stuff affects us differently. Like, another example of a Japanese thing specifically is when I saw the movie The Last Samurai in theaters, I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, yeah, cool. And then it wasn't until a couple of years later I was thinking about it, I was like, why is Tom Cruise the last samurai? Like, why is this white guy the savior of the Japanese samurai spirit? This is kind of BS. And it's still, I still think it's like an enjoyable movie from like the acting, the action sequences and all that. And what was like, that was one of Ken Watanabe's like earliest roles, I believe, like at least in the West.
Yeah.
But it hits differently, and like I don't think I would enjoy it as much. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of crappy, like what that movie does in the larger picture of like tropes and how Asian people and white people are portrayed against each other.
I think a fairly accurate description of that movie is Dances with Samurai.
Yeah,
in that because Dances with Wolves is almost the exact same movie, and just this time it's a white person with Native Americans.
I sure loved that movie as well when I saw it.
For me, as someone who finds the whole period of the Meiji Restoration and the whole idea of, you know, Japan moving into an industrialized military and of Japan moving into a more industrialized society, including industrialized military, I think the movie's very interesting. And like I said, I think the acting, I think the dialogue, I think the battle scenes are great. But I also think the context of we didn't feel like we could tell you this really interesting story of, because The Last Samurai really is, as you said, is a part being played by Ken Watanabe, but they have to kind of imply that maybe it's Tom Cruise because he, as you said, becomes more samurai than the samurai, just like Kevin Costner becomes more native than the natives, or Avatar becomes more blue cat person than the blue cat people. Like there's always that need to have a white avatar through which to tell the story.
And we're getting quite off topic. Yeah. But I want to end this thought by saying that it's okay to have liked something that you now think is problematic or wrong. And in fact, I think it is very good and responsible for you to do that and to evaluate things that you enjoyed in the past and say, I don't enjoy it as much because I have new perspective, or I've talked to people who have taught me things.
And I think, and I'll even take that one step further, but kind of echo what you said earlier. So just more, I guess there's more just underlining your argument with something else you said. I read Ender's Game before I knew much about the author, and I still think that it's a brilliant work of fiction, and there's a lot that it taught me. And there's often times where the frameworks of that are ones that I apply in thinking about things. In the same way, Harry Potter deeply moved me. As a younger person, not as a kid, but as a young adult, and it meant enough to me that at one point I got a tattoo that references it. I have an appointment for the fall to have that tattoo removed and covered up and done in a different way, and I'm looking forward to that. And in this particular climate, I'm probably not gonna mention the lessons I got from it, but probably at some point I might again, when I feel like it's not, when as I hope, J.K. Rowling is really kind of, forgotten about as a cultural icon and we're not still fighting actively over its legacy. Like I said, I think the music in Dr. Horrible is absolutely brilliant. I think just like I think there's a lot of really good stuff in Buffy and in Angel and in Firefly. I think knowing what I do about Joss changes the way I view those things. Probably for me, honestly, the one that's the hardest is Woody Allen, because growing up in New York, like the movie Radio Days about Woody Allen's childhood is quite literally about my father's childhood. He grew up 3 blocks from the house where Woody Allen's character in that movie grows up. And there's an awful lot that Woody Allen to say that for me growing up, in a partly Jewish home in New York City meant so much to me. He's a pretty awful person. And especially like with someone like Joss or Woody, knowing what I know about them means that watching their romance plots hits very differently. But like you said, it doesn't mean we have to give up those things. And no matter how much the strike no matter how long the strike goes, to kind of tie it back to that, I don't think this means you have to hate I certainly don't think Disney has screwed up Star Wars. I think a lot of the Disney stuff has been great. I know some people disagree, but I think there's going to continue, the strike is going to end eventually, and I hope there's going to be more Disney content that comes out, more Star Wars content comes out, and I'm going to be ready to love it. And I just think right now we just need to do all we can to support the strikers and then see where we go from there.
100%, yeah. I mean, that is the most important thing right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is as public, as fans, to say, hey, no, like, give these people what they deserve.
Yeah, very much so. All right, well, this is where we're going to wrap up. As I said, you can join the Patreon and then get access to the patron content. Today, the patron content is going to be on other things that are, that are being made outside of the U.S. studio system, and what are some good recommendations in that regard. Everything from Star Wars comics to Bollywood to whatever. And if you're listening to this normally, you're always welcome to, if you sign on to Patreon now, you can do that and then skip to the end of the episode, and you'll hear that bonus content. Of course, you can find all of my podcasts at theethicalpanda.com. That's where you find all the ways to contact us, to send us feedback, tell us what you think, where you stand on the strike, what are you doing, what do you want to see us do. Would love to hear your thoughts on all of that. And of course, Riki is a regular guest on this. Sarah couldn't join us today, but Riki does a lot of other great content creation. Riki, tell us where they can find what else you do.
Hello, I stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/RikipediaGo, RIKIPEDIAGO, and the Go is for Pokemon Go, because I stream Pokemon Go battles, but I'm, a lot of other streamers just talk about the Pokemon, but I like to have, discussions like this. Like today, we talked about the alt-right rabbit hole on YouTube, for example. So nice. I kind of have carved a space out where I'm I try to be a positive influence on the community, but also an honest one, and just have frank discussions about things. That's awesome. In the way that I try to be, here in these discussions, to say, hey, these things bother me, but it's okay, and if it's okay, that things bother you, but let's not be angry about it. That's the most important thing, is, don't fall down the dark side.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Star Wars.
Yeah, no, it's a great metaphor. Totally agree with you. Well, Riki, thank you so much as always. Thank you to all of you who are listening. On behalf of Riki and myself, we have spoken. All right, welcome back for the Patreon content. As I said, as we were talking about, it is easy, I think, sometimes to forget that there is an incredible amount of movies and TV shows, and not to mention other, non-on-screen products being made about stories we love, or about different kind of stories completely outside of the American TV film system. And so it's not going to be all encompassing. I didn't give Riki any time to prep for this. It's just kind of off the top of your head, but if someone was like, you know what, I want to kind of find some other stuff to watch or other stuff to read, what would be some recommendations for? Let's start first with just stuff to watch. Do you have recommendations of things people can watch that are outside of U.S. media?
I mean, just anything anime.
Mm-hmm.
I had this discussion with a friend on whether Riki Hayashi, can personally be a weeb, and the answer we came to is no, because I'm Japanese. But it's weird because, culturally, I have grown up in the United States my whole life. So, I am biologically, I don't know if 100%, because, that's not how people work. But I'm, right. As far as I know, I'm 100% Japanese. I have Japanese citizenship. But culturally, I'm very American. Howdy, y'all. So, a lot of the times I feel like an outsider. So my connection with anime is very much as an American culturally. I watch it in Japanese because I understand the language, but most of the anime I watch is on USA Netflix. So I haven't even I'm not up to speed on what is trending in Japan necessarily. Yeah. But absolutely, anime is just so good right now. So if I had to recommend something, I would recommend Haikyuu, which is a high school or maybe junior high volleyball sports anime. Fantastic. Cool. I think that one's on Netflix. Movie wise, I mean, the podcast audience can't see, but behind me, there's the DVD for Your Name. The Japanese name for that is Kimi no Na wa, and it's a movie, and it might be my favorite movie of all time. If you have not seen it, have you seen it, Matthew?
I have not.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, you have to change that.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you anything about it. You just have to watch it. It is, okay. Like I said, it may be my favorite movie of all time. Like it's 100% in my top 5, and it's hard to like rank stuff like that, right? But it's just so good.
And I'll find it if I search for Your Name anime.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll say anime is something that I think was locked away from me for a long time. And it wasn't until I was talking more with other people who have ADHD the way I do, because I realized the thing is, like, some of the visual styles are not my favorite, and I'm not a visually minded person, so I think it's the same problem I have with comic books, that when you're supposed to get a lot of the story, not from the dialogue, but from the visuals, it's lost on me. But I think the biggest thing that was holding me up was my ADHD is such that it is very hard for me to watch something while doing nothing else and just staring at the TV. Mm-hmm. And often I want to have something in my hands. I want to be looking at my phone. I want to be fiddling with something. And that means that I'm often going to look away from the screen. And so I can watch like a movie with subtitles. I just kind of set my focus, really push myself through it, and then I need a break. But watching like numerous episodes of a TV show is really hard for me. And till I finally just kind of, and again, talking to some other ADHD people who had done the same, like gave myself permission to listen to watch things dubbed. And 10 anime purists just canceled their subscription because I know that's the thing that is just not supposed to be as good. Though I will say, from what I'm reading, they're putting a lot more time and effort into the dubbing and having the dubbing actors be a lot better and the dubbing the writing for it being a lot better. That's not SAG covered. Maybe it should be one day. That's a different fight. But for example, one thing I would recommend, and that I might get someone to talk to you about, is Full Metal Alchemist. And I saw the Brotherhood version of it. It's a very interesting story. It's very clearly an analog to Germany and German territorial ambitions and the Nazis and all kind of stuff like that. And I think it's a very well told story that there's some questions about the writer. But on a different note, with the possible exception of Toph from Avatar, Ed is the character who I most relate to as a disabled person. And the exception of Echo, I would say, but we've seen so little of her. The portrayal of, and him specifically as someone who has prosthetic limbs. I've talked before on this podcast about how I don't like it when magic or science basically erases your disability. Mm-hmm. Ed his prosthetics can do things mine could never do because of incredible technology, but he still goes through the struggles that I do with my prosthetic. And for that alone, that show is beloved to me. And I'll definitely be watching that. And so one thing I may get people on to talk about is My Neighbor Totoro. It's a great story. I love it, but kind of funny because when we saw the things that happened to those trees that were destroyed outside the Universal lot, I was talking with a bunch of friends, and I sort of joked, like if only there was, some story about the terrible things that can happen when you cut down the trees and threaten all the nice forest friends. And I was like, yeah, because Studio Ghibli has a movie about this. And my 3 different friends all named different movies. I was thinking of My Neighbor Totoro, but it turns out, the forest fighting back when you go into the forest to harm the little animal friends is a very common theme in Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki's work. So I think that would be a great one to do. Stepping out of that world also, a lot of BBC stuff is really good, worth covering. There's a thing called Sharp's Rifles that my buddy Paul has been wanting to talk about for a while. That's on BBC. It's older, but it's supposed to be very good, very interesting, and interesting takes on war and soldiering and the military and stuff like that. I really wanted to cover RRR when it came out, which is very important to note, not Bollywood. It's made by what's called by some Tollywood, the more Tamil language and influenced part of Indian cinema. That one is so much based in Indian history and culture that I didn't feel like that's not one that I'm going to cover. And I think I'm going to be a little careful with some stuff from other countries like that. But yeah, there's some great content that I definitely think I might cover out of India or Japan or Korea or, East Europe or, all these places that are just creating incredible media. Because there really is, and again, no one's calling for a boycott yet. We should still keep watching the great stuff that's out in the United States. But there is great media that's put out by companies that aren't Disney and Universal and Warner Brothers and all them. And that's worth taking a look at too.
I'm glad you mentioned Korea because I have also been getting into a lot of Korean horror stuff.
Interesting.
There's a couple of shows on Netflix. What are they called? I think one of them is All of Us Are Dead, which is a high school zombie TV show. And the other one is Sweet Home, which is not zombies. It's like monsters or like people mutating into monsters. And they're just like so delightfully weird. And I really love it. J-horror, Japanese horror had its heyday with like The Ring and The Grudge, right? Yeah. And I feel like this decade-ish, like K-horror, Korean horror has had like a very nice moment. And I've enjoyed a lot of it.
Yeah. I'm definitely wanting to look into that. I think I'm going to want to be very careful because I think, unfortunately, these, American mega corporations do have incredible reach. And so, like, when you mentioned Korean stuff, my first thought was, I never covered Squid Game. And then realized, again, I did feel like it was, I felt like I would need to have someone Korean to talk with me about it, which if people are out there, please let me know. But also, my understanding is that it was made by Korean production companies and actors, but all under the umbrella, like Netflix made that and paid for it.
That's fair,
I do want to take a look at like what are the things that Netflix just bought the rights to versus things that they actually created. And again, it's, are we drawing arbitrary lines? Yeah, but I want to keep some control of the lines. But yeah, no, there's good things. One thing that actually just occurred to me as we were talking, because I know you've mentioned this before, let's do something on the Godzilla movies from like the 50s and 60s.
Oh my gosh.
I think that'd be so much fun.
Okay. So...
well, if you're up for it.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about Gojira all day and night. But again, like, I'm going to make a very strong recommendation that you need to watch the most recent one from Toho, which was called Shin Gojira.
Okay.
It is... This one I will, like, contextualize a little bit. It was a movie made as social commentary for the government and, in the opinion of the creators of the movie, the inept government response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
Interesting.
And so it is filmed in a way that is kind of like mockumentary style, where a lot of the action, like there's plenty of outdoor stuff with Gojira and fighting and stuff, which is not mockumentary style. But like a lot of the human drama is filmed as if, like documentary, following government officials responding to this kaiju threat.
Oh, that's
and just like kind of like fumbling it. And it is... The first time I watched it, I just kind of enjoyed it. I was like, this is a really different movie from like every other Gojira movie. And then I like read up on it a little and then watched it again with that context. So I think it's really important to have that going into it, to like watch it as that kind of commentary and go, oh, like this is really good.
Nice.
It is an amazing movie.
And it's called Shin Gojira?
Yeah, Shin means new or like Neo.
Okay.
Neo Gojira.
If I type Shin Godzilla, will I find it, or do I need to figure out how to phonetically spell? Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. And like, I'm hoping that you don't get the kind of idiots that you get now, where like, oh, there's so much politics in Star Trek, but like, the Godzilla movies from the very beginning have always been commentary on nuclear weapons.
So it was about the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, and like, and And that, like, throughout the franchise, you can see that. Like, a lot of the movies are silly, like, the suits are silly, and some of the movies are very bad. But throughout it, like, they have tried to maintain this commentary on... And one of the movies, like, one of the, I think it's Heisei-era Gojira movies, Gojira comes back as the vengeful spirit of, like, World War II soldiers, like, coming back for vengeance because, like, you no longer, like, Japan no longer, like, respects, like, its traditions or something like that. Like, it's wild what they have done with this silly monster. So, yeah, they're people who say, like, keep the politics out of X. Fundamentally, I think what they are saying is they don't like the politics that are being portrayed.
Yeah.
And that's, again, like, my opinion is that's fine if you don't like the politics being portrayed, but don't pretend like everything is not political. Like,
yeah. And especially that some of these works, like, was all TV in the 60s very political? No. Was Star Trek? Absolutely. It was one of the most political things out there. So, and it was in the 90s, and it's always been. So.
Or like X-Men, right? Like, how dare you? Like, X-Men is fundamentally a metaphor for race.
There's a great interview with George Lucas talking about the original Star Wars and the politics in those original movies, made in the late 70s.
Yes.
And
the Vietnam War.
And they're talking about how it's about a bunch of, like, ragtag rebels fighting this big empire. And the interviewer a couple times tries to be like, oh yeah, so you mean like the American Revolution, right? And George is very specific, saying, yes, but also the Viet Cong. Yeah. And I was like, oh, you mean the No, not just also the Viet Cong. Like, specifically, he meant America is the empire there. So yeah, there's been politics and all this stuff. Well. All right, Riki, this was awesome. I think I'm going to try to watch the two things you've mentioned. I've got a bunch of other things on my list. I've got a bunch of reading to do. I'm in, I joked that I took the only English class possible for American Lit that didn't make me read Moby Dick. And now I have to talk about Moby Dick, so I'm going to do what every good high schooler should do and read the Cliff Notes instead. Yeah. Cliff Notes instead.
Do those still exist?
It's a new version. It's like Shock Notes, or the younger people in the audience are all going to yell at me. But I just Googled, like, Moby Dick summary, and it took me to one of those. And it's actually very helpful. It's giving me, like, chapter by chapter analysis and stuff like that. And I'll be talking with my guest is a very deep Moby Dick expert. So they will have read the book. I'm going to do something on Sherlock with a guest who knows everything about the Arthur Conan Doyle books and has read those back to front. I think it's going to be, I really, really hope the strike's over soon, especially for the actors, but also for my stuff. I hope that Ahsoka comes out on time. I hope stuff like Andor gets made and comes out. But if not, there's a lot of great content we can make in the meantime.
Okay. I know we've gone on for a long time, but you mentioned Full Metal Alchemist, and I haven't watched that, but you mentioned like German Nazi stuff. And I kind of like keyed in on that because at some point we may want to talk about that, by which I mean just loads of Nazi stuff in anime and like the ethics of it and what it means for fandom. Because I've had, like I said on my stream, like I talk about stuff. I've talked about this with people in chat and been like, yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable how much Nazi stuff there is in anime.
Yeah, I can see that, especially given Japan's role during World War II.
Absolutely,
and all these kind of connections, and
it's a proxy.
And I'm very curious about it. Like, one of the things that threw me about Full Metal Alchemist is it's not directly Nazi, but it's very German. I mean, in some ways, it's almost more like Otto von Bismarck and that level of like German expansionism and militarism and things like that. Although there are some more Nazi-like elements. But one of the things that happens is, like, you don't mind me spoil a couple plot details here, right?
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, so the president, who is clearly, like, evil McEvil Pants, they refer to him as the Fuhrer. And
I think I knew this.
The dubbed, I should say, again, in the dubbed, like, and, I don't know if the Japanese word that is spoken is an exact I don't know if this translation happened in it's the Japanese word for a German word or for the dubbing, but the English word they use is Führer.
Ah.
Now, naming the Führer for an evil character as an evil leader, I think makes total sense, and I've got no problem with that. It's the fact then that when some of the good guys are talking about like who should be in power after this, they continue to use the title Führer. And it threw me. I don't think it's necessarily bad, though, because I think it has a lot to do with the vicissitudes of language, especially because now we're going from German to Japanese to English. And I know that in German, the word Führer just means leader.
Yes.
And it used to be that, if you were on a team and, your team captain, someone might refer to that person as the Führer or, the head of the company or something like that. Now, my understanding is that in modern Germany, that word is very rarely used anymore because of the associations that it has. Just like the name Adolf. There are lots of wonderful people who were named Adolf, I'm sure, beforehand. But a lot of the people who, it isn't a name that people name their kids in Germany anymore. And a lot of the people who were named Adolf changed their name to Dolph. That's where Dolph Lundgren comes from. I think he was born after World War II, but he was I think he was named for a relative who was Adolf, and so they named him Dolph instead. So it wasn't bad, but it was definitely they're using Führer as a morally neutral word for president. It's a very different cultural context than the one which I'm watching.
I may go and watch some just to get a feel for it and see if I can catch that in the Japanese.
Yeah, I'd love to know what you pick up on it, because I do think it's very interesting, and I do think that topic of I was very fascinated by World War II.
It's my degree.
It comes from my father. My father actually did when he went to law school, he studied with one of the professors who had been a prosecutor at the war crimes trials in Japan after World War II.
Oh my gosh! And
one of the things that he thought was really troubling, and that he got my father thinking a lot about, and that kind of passed on to me, was how everyone knows the name Nuremberg trials. We know almost nothing about the trials in Japan, and part of that is, a big part of that is because there was a sense of how could the Germans, who are white Europeans like us, do these terrible things? Versus the flip side of the Japanese, they're barbaric. Of course they did these kind of things. There's so much racism in every part of how World War II is viewed by Americans in Japan. But that was a particular thing that this person who'd been one of the prosecutors talked about, and my father learned about and kind of passed on to me. And so, yeah, I'm always very fascinated by the way that part of the way that part of Japanese history is taught in Japan or is talked about in Japan. So, yeah, I would love to
again, I don't know for certain because I didn't grow up there. I didn't go to school there. But I understand enough about the cultural and political situation in the country to say that Japan never had the opportunity to reckon with its history in the same way that Germany did. And I think that's kind of similar to what you're talking about with Nuremberg, right? The fact that the Holocaust happened. And the Holocaust happened, everyone in the audience, do not know Holocaust denial. It happened. But the fact that the Holocaust happened and that the Nuremberg trials happened primarily as a, condemnation of that and to put people on trial for their part in that. What am I trying to say? Is that that put it front and center in the world, and the German people were forced to reckon with that and understand what they took a part in. Whereas in Japan, there were war crimes. There were terrible things. There was, there's an incident that was called I'm going to use a word here that may make people uncomfortable, but this is what it's called. Yeah. The rape of Nanking, a Chinese city, of a terrible incident there of near, genocide.
Yeah.
And it's not it wasn't as publicized historically, and I feel like that has allowed Japan as a nation to sweep their crimes under the rug in a lot of ways, and to say oh no, and also the atomic bombs, a sense of victimhood, right? We were the victims in World War II, and to ignore the victimization that the country inflicted upon other people.
Yeah.
And I think part of what happened, we're just going to record the whole podcast now.
Yeah.
But part of what happens is that Nazism, like Nazi imagery, is used in anime as a proxy for Japanese imperialism, because they don't want to put Japanese imperialism front and center, because that will bring attention to, like, oh, we were the baddies. And it's like, no, these were the baddies. But also, like, this weird fetishization of that Nazi ideal of the blue-eyed, blonde Superman. Like, you'll notice, like, a lot of anime, like, that's the villain, right?
Yeah.
That's the Nazi-looking villain. Gundam, I'm looking at you. I love Gundam. I love Mobile Suit Gundam. But the main villain is so compelling for that reason.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. And that's a conversation that I would love to have both on and off air, because I know that that idea of a country that, or a region that adopts a position of victimhood after they lose a war, and certainly I think some victimhood is very much justified after the atomic bombs. But as you said, still, it's a war. Horrible things happen on all sides, and there were war crimes committed. Quick aside, also, I think it's important to note that, and this is something I know my father talked about, that what you said about the horrible things that happened in Nanking, but also in a lot of other Chinese cities. When I grew up learning about World War II and the terrible things Japan did, I never learned about that. I learned about the Bataan Death March. I learned about the horrible things that happened to American soldiers and to British. Sure. And if you think even like a movie that was, really kind of pushed this, the movie Empire of the Sun, it's all about the terrible things that the Japanese did to the British citizens in, I forget if it's Singapore or Hong Kong, but in one of those two. Back to the main subject we were talking about, as I said, I think this idea of when people are losers in war or in any kind of conflict, and they focus into a place of victimhood and never really have to wrestle with the terrible things that they did. I take your word for it about in Japan. It's not something I know much about, but I think it absolutely describes the American South, in terms of the lost cause and all the ideas about the Confederacy as this terrible, the war of northern aggression. And there was certainly a lot of deprivation that happened in the South after the Civil War. And part of that was intentional by the North. I'm not even talking about freeing slaves and stuff like that, but just in terms of those economies. But they went into all of that became, instead of what did we do that led us to this place, it became what did they do to us? And it was so unfair and so wrong. And therefore, everything about slavery gets totally brushed under the rug, just as you were saying, and I think this is probably true in many places. I think in many ways, part of why Germany may be one of the places where they broke that cycle is because that's exactly what they did after World War I. And that's exactly what Hitler was able to come to power on. So,
yeah, it is like, and to be 100% clear, like the atomic bombs, like Japan was a victim, and I truly believe that was a war crime in itself.
Yep,
but
100%.
It doesn't mean that you can say, oh, well, we were the victims of war crimes, so hence our war crimes don't matter. Like that is how I think, like, historically Japan has shaped its own narrative to itself and to the world. And, you can't do that. You got to take responsibility for what you did as well.
I think that's so true. And I think that's true about nation states. It's also true about interpersonal relationships. One of my favorite songs these days, and I promise we're going to wrap up because we're so far off topic, but these are fascinating conversations. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's a song called Wish We Could Have Stayed Friends by Ian McDonald.
I'm not familiar.
He's a great musician. It's just kind of him and a guitar and a few little bit of instrumentation. He's a very witty lyricist, but it's about him thinking about a romantic partner who he broke up with, and how he's saying that, like, he wished they could have stayed friends, but they didn't. And in it, he names that, like, yeah, she did some bad things to him, and he did some bad things to her. And he's just kind of looking at all of it with a feeling of sadness and regret. And I think that's such a healthy attitude, of when I hear someone, there are abusive relationships, and I'm not saying abuse is ever justified. And if you're talking about an abusive relationship, all bets are off. But in a lot of cases, I think there are situations where both sides in a relationship, and again, it could be individuals, it could be companies, it could be nation states, both do some bad things to each other. And maybe one does a lot more, but it doesn't justify what the other did. And I think there's value in both sides being able to say, yeah, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Where was I a victim? Where was I causing a victimhood? And how can I just work on myself to get better?
And on that note...
yes. On that note, thank you all for the Patreons.
Go watch Shin Gojira, Your Name, Mobile Suit Gundam. Gundam is like such an expansive franchise. Like it's hard to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. But if you want to start to try to get into that, I can try to recommend Pass. But I think and Haikyuu. If you like sports, if you like teen sports drama.
Okay.
One of the best.
I will say, it's not teen, but Yuri on Ice, which is gay sports drama, is one of my favorite anime that I've ever seen. I haven't seen that many, but Yuri on Ice is... have I ranted to you about Yuri on Ice before?
No, but Sarah has enjoyed that. I haven't really watched it that much.
60 seconds, and then I promise we're ending this. And if you want to just stop now, but 60 seconds on this, and then we're ending. Yuri on Ice, it's about the relationships among skaters who are on the World Championship and Olympic circuit. Yeah, and it is so accurate to what those situations are like that during the Olympics, the male ice skaters would gather in Olympic Village and watch it together. And apparently, for a lot of the animations of the animations of the figure skating is so good that in at least one case, I believe Korean, I might be wrong about that, but someone went to the Olympics and did a routine that was taken basically, and I think they talked to the people from the show and were like, is this okay that I use your choreography? They used the choreography of an ice routine from the show. So it's very good. The is incredibly gorgeous. It's a beautiful gay love story. Definitely worth watching. All right. And on that, patrons, thank you so much. You're the real heroes. You're what makes all this possible. We are done.